Hi, everybody. My name is Penny P. I'm an alcoholic from Livermore, California. And gee, Karen, no pressure at all. But thank you for that introduction. And thanks to I see some very friendly faces on here. Some friends from New Jersey, some friends from here in California, and a friend from Canada. And so I'm just really, really grateful to be here and to have the opportunity to be of service this evening. I and with that introduction, I do have to say that I've been sick all day, and so I'm hoping that I can at least share a message of recovery this evening. And welcome to our observing nurse this evening. We're glad you're here, and please feel free to stay after if you have any questions that we can answer. I walked into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in Honolulu, Hawaii on Sunday, October 9th, 1977. And last October, I celebrated 48 years of continuous sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Most of the faces on my screen are people of my age. So, but if you're a newcomer and you're hearing me say that I'm 48 years sober and I'm still an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I just want to know that I am active in AA because of the amazing life I've been given as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. I crawled into the rooms of AA from behind the Dempsey dumpster of a Skid Row bar. I had tried everything that is on chapter 3 of our big book on page 31. You know, it wasn't until the PLBB came out that and I was going through that book, and I saw in the PLBB that, you know, that paragraph that says switched from scotch to brandy, taking a trip, not taking a trip. In the PLBB, it's bulletized. So it's almost like a checklist. And it was funny because when I saw it there, it was like, oh, well, if I just had a checklist that this is what I needed to do before I got to AA, got this one, got this one, got this one. And so I have a sponsor. My sponsor is Linda R. from Port Townsend, Washington. She celebrated 51 years last November, and for many years, Linda's been my sponsor for just a little bit over 2 years. For nearly 30 years, I was sponsored by Peg M. from Bellevue, Nebraska, and you know, it's been interesting. When Peg passed away, Peg had 60 years on February 4th, and passed away 10 days later on Valentine's Day, February 14th of 2024. And when Peg passed, you know, I trudged the road. I keep company with a lot of sober people, and I keep company with a lot of longtime sober women. And I know women who have trudged this path, who have walked through the journey of having a longtime sponsor pass away. And so you know, just like everything else in the program, I relied on your experience, strength, and hope on what do I do now? How do I do this? And you know, I've been involved in the online AA community since the late 1980s. It did not start in March of 2020. Sorry to disappoint anyone who didn't know that, but we've been doing this online since the late 1980s. We started before there was even access to the internet. And so I've been connected online with a lot of people for a lot of years. And it's just you know, when the pandemic hit and the whole world closed down, and this plethora of meetings came online for us, similar to this group and all of the other meetings that we get flyers for in our inboxes. Because before that, I was being told that online AA isn't real AA. And that kind of surprised me because the online meetings I was going to, we're talking about the steps, we're talking about the traditions, we're talking about the big book. And I didn't know what was not AA about that, but apparently a few people had that opinion, and Some people chose not to get involved in the online community. And I have no idea why I even went down that road. But just keep in mind, I've been sick all day. So I started drinking. I don't tell much of my story because I was a blackout drinker. And so most of my story is hearsay. People told me what happened. I started drinking in a nice cocktail lounge in New York. And um, and I don't even know what it was. I'd been around booze all my life. I have my mother's side of the family. Every single one of my mother's siblings died of our disease. She was the second oldest of seven, and she was the only sibling that did not die of alcoholism. All of her brothers and sisters died of our disease. I have several cousins that are in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sister died of our disease. And so I was around alcohol as a kid. Um, and and I didn't drink in high school because I was involved in sports, and so I was always on a training plan. But and I know some people didn't let that stop them, but apparently it was important to me. But I was in New York, and I was in a nice cocktail lounge, and I ordered something in a stem glass, and I must have held my little pinky out when I drank it. And that's how I started drinking. And as I said at the end of my drinking, I'm coming to behind Dempsey dumpsters of Skid Row bars and supporting my habit the way women in those places find it necessary to do that. And and along the way, um, I don't remember that anybody talked to me specifically about Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous because when I was a kid, a friend of mine, her dad went to AA. And I'm also of that era where we had Dear Abby and Ann Landers in the newspapers, and they were big proponents of Alcoholics Anonymous, great friends of AA and Al-Anon. And so I knew of it, but I had no idea what happened here. And somehow, I'd seen the movie Days of Wine and Roses, and somehow I had this image of my mind of, a dark, smoky room. And I got sober in 1977, so certainly it was smoky. Um, but I also had this image of guys in trench coats with bottles in their pockets sitting in the back of the room, and I had no idea what Alcoholics Anonymous was like. I did try all of the things that it talks about in chapter 3 on page 31. And one of the last things was taking more physical exercise. I'd already sworn off with and without a solemn oath. I believe I've been sober since my first meeting only because I did all of my slips before I got here, because I tried everything and nothing worked. And I joined a softball team. And one Sunday morning, I hadn't had a drink that day, and I hadn't had a drink the day before. I have no idea. I'm one of those alcoholics that has no idea when I had my last drink of alcohol. I count my sobriety from my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because I know I haven't had a drink since then. And but one Sunday morning, was we were playing softball, and I missed a real easy field, and my coach pulled me out of the game. And as I walked off the field and walked past my coach, I asked him if his mother knew who his father was. I'm not sure those are the words I used. And then I got in my car and I pulled out of Kapiolani Park, and I drove home thinking that if I just got my car going fast enough, I could go over the little wall on Diamond Head Road and I could go over the cliff. And for some reason, I hadn't had a drink that day. And I was afraid that at the last minute, I'd pick my foot up off the accelerator and wouldn't hit the wall hard enough to die. And that I'd just be in pain. And I was in pain. I couldn't do this anymore. And I went home and I fixed myself a drink. And before I drank it, I walked to the back of the house and I picked up the phone and I called information. I asked for the phone number of Alcoholics Anonymous. And every time, I mean, I just continue to be amazed at the gifts that I've been given in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. The information operator did not give me the phone number of Alcoholics Anonymous. That was when we had real live information operators that you could talk to. She connected me with Alcoholics Anonymous. And a woman answered the phone and she said, Alcoholics Anonymous, can I help you? And I said, well, I'd like to know something about your program for a friend of mine that I think might have a problem. And she said, oh, maybe you should take your friend to a meeting. And I said, no, 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 no. My friend wouldn't want to do that. But if you tell me about AA, I can tell my friend about AA. And she started talking about Alcoholics Anonymous and she started talking about the steps. And if you're talking about the steps, you're going to be talking about God at some point. And I interrupted her and explained to her that I don't believe in God. And then she placed the hook and she said, oh, but does your friend believe in God? And so I let her tell me where there was a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I did not want one in my neighborhood. I don't know if y'all can remember, when we first make that connection. And oh God, I don't want people to know I'm going to AA. Oh my God, I don't want them to know I'm an alcoholic. My neighbors had to call the emergency medical team on me because I was passed out on my front lawn and they thought I was dead. But God forbid they see me going into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I mean, it's crazy the way we think when we're the way we think when we're new, the way we think when we're old. So the woman on the phone gave me a location of an AA meeting. It was at the Atkinson YMCA on Ala Moana Boulevard, right across from Shirkia at Ala Moana, and I want to tell you that last month, the end of February and the beginning of March, was the Pacific Regional AA Service Assembly, and it was in Honolulu, Hawaii, and it was at the Hilton Hawaiian Village. And I got to see the meeting is no longer held there, but I got to see where I went to my very first AA meeting, and I got to see where my first home group was. And on both Sunday mornings that I was there, I got to go to the meeting. That was my very first home group. And the first day that I walked in, the first person I ran into in that meeting was the guy that was the chairperson at my very first meeting 48 years ago, Alan Kay, and he's 54 years sober. And last October, I had the privilege of I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for the annual Women's Sobriety Fest. And on the Friday morning that I was there, I got to have breakfast with my friend Connie C., who sat next to me at my very first AA meeting. And Connie has 60 days more sobriety than I do. And so I just had this. I walked into the meeting. I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. If I had known it was a program of abstinence, I might have not gone. Um, and and I didn't know anything about open meetings or closed meetings. And this happens to be an open meeting, so all are welcome. And 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 I sat down. I sat between two women. They put me in the front row. They knew I was a newcomer, and then Alan started the meeting, and and he asked if I mean, he knew they'd already told him they had a newcomer in the room, and but he asked that question that we ask in AA meetings. So, do we have anyone that's here for their very first meeting? And I'm sitting in the front row crying. Well, the whole room knows that we've got a newcomer in the room. And I wasn't going to raise my hand, but Blanche kind of poked my elbow and my hand kind of went up. And Alan says, would you like to give us your name? I said, no, 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 no. And I was just so, and I have cried through 48 years. I used to say that I cried through my whole first year of sobriety, but I have cried for 48 years. I just cry for different reasons today. And I left the meeting that night. That was Sunday, October 9th, 1977. And I went back the following Sunday because I thought I had joined Sunday night AA. And I walked in, and Blanche, who had sat next to me at my first meeting on the other side from Connie, Blanche had 30 days more sobriety than I do. She passed away during COVID, and but she died with fully sober. She both Connie and Blanche and I have been sober since my first meeting. And Blanche was back by the coffee pots, and she came up to me and she remembered my name. And that was huge. She said, Penny, it's so good to see you. How many meetings did you get to this week? And I said, well, I was here last Sunday. And she said, but during the week, how many meetings did you go to during the week? And I was baffled. And I said, well, last Sunday, I was here last Sunday. I mean, I thought, once a week should be. And she went over to the literature rack and she got a meeting schedule. And we had, I think, about 80 meetings a week in Honolulu when I got sober. And she got the meeting schedule and she marked some stuff on it. And then she took me over to Connie, who had sat next to me the week before. And she said, I've marked the meetings where I'll meet Penny. Would you mark the meetings where you'll meet Penny? And Connie marks the meetings and she took me over to Renee and Renee marks some meetings. And I started going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I landed in this little pocket of enthusiasm of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was what an amazing gift I was given. I landed in a pocket of enthusiasm in 1977 that was talking about the big book and talking about recovery and talking about the steps and talking about sponsorship. And I had old timers, long timers that I was going to meetings with that were giving me some of the history of AA. And I wish I'd known enough to pay more attention and to write it down in those days when they were sharing that with me, because there's some history lost because we don't have that information. And I started going to meetings with these long timers, and there was a conference coming up, the Hawaii Convention, annual convention, and I didn't have enough money to buy a ticket, and they bought me a ticket. And I'll tell you that I was talking with someone the other day, and we were talking about what our home groups were like when we were new, and this friend of mine mentioned that somebody bought her first ticket to a AA convention, and she said, well, as soon as I get my paycheck, I'll pay you back. And they said, no, the next conference, you'll pay it forward. You'll buy someone else a ticket. And I've been doing that now. And whenever I register for a conference, I'm well able to pay for a registration for a newcomer that can't otherwise enjoy the experience. For those of you that have been to conferences and know what happens there and the fellowship and the way that we just make those connections. Peg used to call them heartstrings, and that we just connect with each other and we carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a sponsor, and I got a sponsor that had a sponsor, and her sponsor was taking her through the big book to do the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so that's how I was taken through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous the first time. I was taken through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We started at the very beginning of the book. And my sponsor said to me, what I'm sure that her sponsor Bonnie must have said to her, is that as we go through the book, I want you to look for prayers, promises, and principles. She said, there's prayers in every step. If it says we ask, that's prayer. And there's promises in every step. They may not be as apparent to you. You may spot some that aren't apparent to me, but there's promises in every step. So those promises that were read at the beginning of the meeting, those are our 9th step promises. But there's promises before then. The 3rd step promises. Oh my God, the 5th step promises. I love the 5th step promises, are my favorite. But then we've got the 10th step promises and the 11th step promises. And there's all of these and principles. And today in current AA, we talk a lot about the 36 principles, the steps, the traditions, and the concepts. And I think of those as capital P principles. And my sponsor was talking to me about lowercase principles. As I went through the steps, as I read through the book, and she had me look for the principles that the program is based on, principles like willingness and honesty and integrity and ethics and willingness and compassion and tolerance and all of those things that come up as we go through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she didn't tell me then, but she told me after I did my fifth step, those principles that she'd had me writing down, those were the things I was going to use in place of my character defects and my shortcomings. Those were what I was going to. I was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. And these are the things I'm going to bring into practice to replace those things. And so in my area, I have a friend that lives out here, my friend Kathy Y. And Kathy Y and I, and we've got an older crowd here, so some of you will remember the old Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland, let's put on a play in the backyard movies. And Kathy and I and Diane and Jeff, and we kind of do this thing, don't we? We just kind of, oh, let's have a workshop. And so several years ago now, Kathy and I decided to do a 4-step workshop. And as we went through it, one of the things that we did was we did brainstorming on what principles do you find in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous in those first 4 steps that you're going to be putting into practice later in the rest of your steps. And it's amazing and of course there's principles that go across all the steps. But then there's principles that just, they just speak really to me about a specific step. And I love that. I love that, I have those things for a touchstone, that those are part of the program that I was given, and that they connect me with my early days, and they connect me with the women I sponsor today, and they connect me going forward. I life has been so challenging and so wonderful and so amazing. My friend Pat G just celebrated 51 years of sobriety on April 1st. And one of the lines that Pat says is, what if it's wonderful? You go to Pat and you say, oh my God, this is going on and I don't know what's going to happen. And Pat says, what if it's wonderful? And she, she's one of my favorite people because, just because of those attitude, I surround myself with people like that who are working the program, trudging the path, and absolutely insist on enjoying life, which is what our big book tells us. I relocated from Hawaii when I was about 2.5 years sober. I moved to the East Coast, Area 13, Washington, D.C., and I got involved in intergroup there. I got sober through the intergroup office, so most of my service has been through intergroup. I love general service. I've been a general service rep 3 times, I think, and not in Hawaii, but once in Virginia when I lived in Virginia, and then twice when I've been out here in California. But most of my service comes through intergroup because that's the boots on the ground. That's the people that are calling in and saying, how do I find a meeting? How do I find a women's meeting? How do I find a sponsor? And I volunteer at our service center. Last night was my monthly commitment. I'm there on the first Monday of the month. And I had 4 people stop in to buy books and to buy literature and to buy coins and to pick up one of the pamphlets that's under review for the General Service Conference this year. That's the AA members and medications and other drugs. And stop to pick that up because it's one of our agenda items this year. And he was going off to the primary purpose group, and they were having their review of the agenda items so that their GSR can take that to our service assembly in a couple of weeks in Petaluma. And, I love all sides of AA. As many of you that have long-term sobriety, we don't get the opportunity as much to do the kind of 12-step calls that we used to do. But, oh, aren't they amazing to look back on? The gifts that we were given by being able to take a phone call at 1:30 in the morning, and the first thing they say is, well, I'm not an alcoholic. And it's like, okay, you called the hotline and you're drunk, specifically to say, I'm not an alcoholic. I just, some of the 12-step calls that we got to go on, and the gift that they continue to give to me, and the memories that I have of being given the opportunity to carry the message. Because when I got in here, like it says on the top of, I think it's page 62, I was selfish, self-seeking, self-centered. I wasn't going to reach out my hand to anybody else. I wasn't going to be of service. I wasn't going to answer the phone at 1:30 in the morning. Are you kidding me? And yet somebody did it for me. And isn't it my job to continue to do that, to carry that message of recovery? And so I moved to Virginia, and of course they did not do the meetings right in Virginia. And interestingly enough, I will tell on myself, I apparently went to meetings for a few months, introducing myself by saying, hi, my name is Penny P. I'm an alcoholic, and you're not doing it right. And one day a guy came up to me before the meeting, and he was very upset. And he said, Penny, we are doing fine. We were fine before you got here, and we will be fine when you are gone. And I thought, what is he so upset about? And he said, every week, he said, hi, my name's Penny P. I'm an alcoholic, and you're not doing it. He said, we're doing fine. We use the same big book. We use the same steps. We've got the same traditions. And during the pandemic, I was in an AA meeting, and Peter was there sharing, and we haven't seen each other since I left Virginia. I don't know, 35 years ago, maybe even more than that. So I lived in Virginia for a while, and then I came to I had a job where God gave me an amazing job. I've had a wonderful, wonderful career, and I had a temporary duty assignment out here in California, and I was only supposed to be out here for 6 weeks. And they kept extending my contract on this project that I was working at. And so finally, I asked for a relocation transfer, and my company moved me out to California. And I've been out here ever since. And I did 5 years in Albuquerque. And the first thing I did when I got to Albuquerque was I found a home group. And I was in Albuquerque working for about 5 years, and I had a home group, and I had service commitments, and I just I got to be part of the fellowship wherever I went. When I travel, when I moved cross country, when my company relocated me, I asked them if I could drive my car across rather than shipping it. And so I took a 2-week vacation and drove my car cross country. And I had been camping in someplace in Minnesota. And it was morning, and I had packed up the car, and I was headed to the freeway. And I may have been pushing a little hard on the accelerator, because a Blue Earth County Sheriff's officer came up behind me and pulled up next to me, and I avoided looking at him for as long as I can, because if you don't look at him, they can't motion you over to the curb, And finally, I looked at him because we were coming to a hill and it wasn't safe, and he just motioned me over, and I pulled over, and he came up to the driver's side, and he said, I saw your bumper sticker. I had an Easy Does It bumper sticker. He said, are you a friend of Bill W? And I said, yeah. And I already have my license and registration out. And he said, did you read the 24-hour book today? This was before Daily Reflections. And I thought, thank God I didn't say, if I'd read the 24-hour book, you wouldn't have had to pull me over. And I just said, no, I don't think I did. He said, I've got it in the car. Let me go get it. He goes back to his car, and he gets the 24-hour book, and he comes back. And I'm sure it had something to do with acceptance. And and then he got a call over his radio, and he said, I got to take that call. Slow down. You'll get there more safely. And he took off. And I remember telling my sponsor that story, and she said, Penny, if you ever think there isn't a higher power, he's a deputy county sheriff in Blue Earth County, Minnesota. And I have had God show up in all of those ways. I have had my higher power shows up, and I don't know if he's using my ears or your words, but he shows up and he carries the message. And that's the gift I've been given in Alcoholics Anonymous. At 20 years sober, I was just in a step study recently, and we were talking about the fourth step, and somebody said that they only do the fourth step once, and I'm here to tell you that my experience is different than that. Please do it the way you do it if that works for you. But at 20 years sober, the wheels fell off the wagon. I had already gotten Peg Martin as a sponsor the year before, and which was a real adventure in getting Peg as a sponsor. And I called her up and I told her what was going on. And she said, Penny, I think you need to go back through the steps. And I thought, I'm 20 years sober. And she said, I think you need to go back through the steps. And I thought she meant I needed to write a fourth step. And, we hear people talk about taking the steps cafeteria style. That's never worked for me. I don't know if it works for others, but it hasn't worked for me. I kept trying to write a fourth step. And I was driving to the airport. I was going out of town. I was going to City, Iowa in a snowstorm. It was an amazing journey. And I'm talking to God. I have the radio off and I'm talking to God. And I'm telling God, I'm trying to write this fourth step and I can't get this fourth step written. And there was a voice in my car. I was the only person in my car. And I heard a voice in my car say, well, you can't do the fourth until you've done the first. And I got to San Francisco airport, and my carry-on luggage had my big book, a notebook, a pen, a highlighter, and a deck of cards. And I put the deck of cards back in my carry-on. And I sat down. My flight had been delayed an hour, and I started writing my grudge list on my fourth step. I went through the first three steps. And then when I got on the plane, I started writing my grudge list. And I wrote on my fourth step all the way from San Francisco to Sioux City, Iowa. And I went to the conference that weekend, and it was just an amazing, amazing experience. And I know it's because I was in the middle of the steps and in the middle of a conference, and uh, and on the way home, I finished writing my fourth step, and I called Peg and I said I need to do a fifth step. And she was coming to California the following weekend, and I picked her up at the airport and we went to her hotel and I did a fifth step. And then I went on to 6 and 7, and I looked at those character defects that I'd identified again. And I thought I had been an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I was a busy member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was busy. I was busy doing a lot of stuff. I was on this committee and I was on that committee, and I was doing this and I was doing that, but I wasn't really doing the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this got me back on track. And I'm so grateful. And today I sponsor women. I sponsor women with long-term sobriety, and they often come to me because they find themselves in a place where the wheels have come off the wagon and they don't know what to do. And our choices at that point are, we may not choose to drink, but many of us choose to leave because it's too hard and it's too embarrassing to sit in a room and admit that I'm a long timer and I'm back on the steps again. And I just had to get over that. And I talk about having to put the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous into practice in my life. I'm a huge fan of the traditions. I love the traditions checklist. I love the questions on the traditions checklist. A friend of mine says that, well, I've often said for several years, I say the steps keep me from committing suicide and the traditions keep me from committing homicide, because the steps help me live with me and the traditions help me live with you. And then recently, a friend of mine added, and the concepts help us from committing genocide, because the concepts help us to keep the program of Alcoholics Anonymous alive. And I'm so grateful for the amazing journey that I've been privileged to have, that I have remained active in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am so grateful that in the late 80s, I got involved in online AA. for those of you who might have any questions about online AEA, if you have a subscription to the Grapevine Archive in, I think it was in October of 1986, I think there's a article called The Slopped SysOp. And a SysOp is a systems operator in an online community. And I was on FidoNet in those days. But Prodigy was around, and CompuServe and Lamplighters, if any of you were familiar with those. And the story in the Grapevine in 1986 is about the first recorded online 12-step call that we're aware of, the first one that's documented. And it's a great story. And it's a really fun read. And I just, online AA connected me with AA in California when I got here. And then we went international. And then I got connected with some other groups. And then some of the other platforms came into play, WebEx and Zoom and GoToMeeting and all of those, Skype. And we had online meetings. And still, we were saying to people, online AA isn't real AA. And yet, think of the people who have had the privilege of not having AA meetings for many years because of their situation, because they're caretakers, because they're disabled, because they're in a care facility and no one is coming to get them to take them to a face-to-face meeting. All of those people have been given the gift of being able to come back to AA meetings and trudge this path with us. And I get to sit in meetings with people like that every day. There's a woman that I talked to in New Jersey that is in a care facility, and she's sharp as a tack, but she's there because she has no family and she can't care for herself at home, but she can get to AA meetings on her computer. And the gift that we give, not just the gift that we receive, but the gift that we give by being able to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the joy that I get to have in my life today is absolutely amazing. I'm so grateful for the women who have sponsored me, the women who have trudged the path with me, who have been my friends, and their dear husbands, a couple of whom are in the room tonight. Thank you to both of you for being here. And I met Bob and Liz at a conference in New Jersey. God, how many years ago was that? And we had so much fun. It was one of the most fun conferences I'd ever had. Scott Redmond was one of the speakers, and I spoke, and it was amazing. And then Diane and Jeff moved here from Texas and came to our principal studies group on Monday night, and I got to meet them and trudge the path with them. And Kristen, I know from Toronto, and other people that are in the room that, I shouldn't have started naming people because I'm going to miss people. But what a gift. I don't know how I go from crawling out from behind a Dempsey dumpster to the life I get to have today. I know I could have missed all this if it wasn't for people like you carrying the message to people like me and telling me that I didn't have to drink like that anymore, and I don't have to support my habit that way anymore, and I don't have to do those things anymore, and that there's hope. And that even though AA meetings are not a large part of anybody's medical training, nursing training, I'm grateful for the nurses that come to our meetings and sit and listen to us share. We're getting the word out. We're getting the word out. And if that nurse carries that message to just one alcoholic, we know that it ripples out from there. And we could have missed all this. What an opportunity we've been given. Grateful to be here. And Karen, thank you so much for asking me to come and share tonight.